Okay, ladies and gentlemen, just a few housekeeping announcements before we start the actual session. These are some of the announcements that I am required to make before we start. When a general alarm is activated in this convention center, kindly evacuate the building immediately by proceeding to the nearest exit. The exit signs are marked everywhere. You can follow those exit signs and wait outside for the all clear to be given before you can return to this place. The alarm is a digital audio signal that will beep twice, followed by a female voice that states, "Please evacuate the building." Please note that this is the entire center is conference area is a no smoking area. Also, please put your cell phones either in silent mode or vibration mode or switch them off, whatever. Okay. Finally, attendee feedback is important, so please, at the end of the session, give your feedback on the session. And there are two ways to do it. You can either complete the electronic session evaluation for each concurrent session, and you can access that through the Safety 2019 app, or you'll probably be getting an email also, and that will give you a link where you can give your feedback. Okay. Okay. The topic that we're discussing is process safety management, and I'll be talking about some challenges that the different companies are facing in implementing the process safety management systems, and also I'll be talking about some of the opportunities that exist by way of good implementation of process safety management system. This is a brief introduction about myself. I'm basically a mechanical engineer, and I have had about 38 years of work experience. 38 years doing jobs initially, and then involved now in training and consultancy activities. I'm a certified assessor and approved trainer from various bodies in the areas of personal safety as well as process safety. And these are some of the areas in which we are providing services to various clients globally. This is the main topic of our session today. Hopefully at the end of the day, end of the session, and at the end of the day also, obviously. So I'll be requesting you to share your views, either your experiences, or if you have any questions related to the topic, or if you want to share your thoughts on this, on whatever discussions we have today, okay? Please feel free to share those. The agenda or the key discussion points that we're discussing, I'll be giving you a brief background, how the process safety management standard came about, what were the regulatory standards that were introduced, particularly in the USA, the OSHA 1910.119 standard. And there were some other models that were introduced by other companies like the DuPont process safety management system or the CCPS PSM model. I'll be briefly talking about those different models. And then we'll move on to the actual 4 areas that I want to talk about, the 5 major challenges in implementing a good process safety management system, an effective management system, out of all the elements that are covered in the process safety management, what are the 5 major weak areas that I consider based on my own experiences, 5 opportunities from which we can build, which we can use to develop good safety management systems in process area, and finally 5 tips or success tools that I can share with you. Now, whatever I'm talking about, these challenges or opportunities or the weak elements that I consider, these are not based on any formal survey or any formal study as such. These are based on my own 30 years of experience working with different clients, belonging to different countries, belonging to different industrial sectors, from oil and gas to power and energy, to transportation and construction, to engineering, and to fast-moving consumer goods. So based on that experience, what I've gathered are the different challenges that the companies face and the opportunities that they have. I'll be sharing those with you. So all this is based on my actual hands-on field experience with a variety of clients and of all different sizes, small companies, big companies, government companies, private companies, and the countries that I've worked in, they belong to the Middle East region, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, Jordan, and also in the Far East area with the Malaysia and Indonesia and Taiwan, Korea, South Korea, and Thailand, and Vietnam. Okay. So based on that experience, I'll be sharing with you the challenges that I think most companies face. Okay, now how did all this come about? I believe most of you have heard about at least a few of these incidents, if not all. Okay. There was the disaster at Flixborough in the UK, there was the Bhopal incident in India, then there was this Chernobyl accident, the nuclear disaster, the Piper Alpha incident in the North Sea, and then the Mexico City explosion, LPG tank explosion, and the Phillips Pasadena vapor cloud explosion. Now, these were some of the incidents which probably prompted the development of the regulatory reforms. Particularly, I believe, Bhopal incident in India, and that was if you look at the fatality figures, it's a huge figure. And this is only the figure of people who died instantly at that very moment when the explosion occurred. Even to this day, there are deformed children born in those areas. So that has that explosion, that the MIC that was released, that has a genetic effect. Okay. So this probably was the biggest prompt, although the incident occurred in India, but the company involved was an American company, Union Carbide. Okay. So this probably had the greatest influence on developing of this PSM regulations, particularly in the US. Piper Alpha was another big disaster in the oil and gas industry, an offshore platform that was completely destroyed and killing about 167 people who were on that platform at that night when this incident occurred. But that probably prompted more regulations in the UK, particularly the safety case regulations, what is known as the OSCR, Offshore Safety Case Regulations. Okay. So that was the main prompter for those regulations. But in the US, this Bhopal incident was the main factor. Okay, but now just a prompting question to you. Not just for these industries, anywhere where you have these kind of disasters. Just look at this question and try to come up with an answer for this. What do you think the management and staff of these plants would have said if you asked them the day before this incident occurred? If you asked them, what do you think about your safety management system? Yeah? Perfect. Excellent trainings, very competent people we have. Our equipment integrity is world class, okay? And incidentally, when this the Texas refinery incident occurred, very close to here, right? When this Texas refinery incident occurred, it was immediately after the lunch break. This explosion occurred immediately after the lunch break, and that lunch that was given to the contractors, that was a company-sponsored lunch celebrating successful safety performance. Sorry? So even on the Gulf of Mexico, in the Deepwater Horizon, there also, just the night before this, the senior-most management was celebrating timely, or rather before time, completion of the drilling operation, and successfully and without any safety incidents. So that's the kind of probably thing that we are living in, okay? That we have excellent systems, and the very next day you have these disasters. Okay, this was just a general question about those people or those companies, people belonging to those companies who had this kind of a disaster. And this is a question for you. How many of you, by the way, have a formal process safety management system in your organizations? Okay. I would say, sorry? Asset integrity management system, okay. So one element of that, okay. Okay, I see about 50% of the hands raised. So around 50% of you have some kind of a formal process safety management system, okay? How many of you have, by the way, a general personal safety management system? Less than that, really? A general personal. Sorry? The personal safety management system, the general occupational safety. Probably everybody, huh? So when we talk about the personal safety management system, probably every organization has some kind of, good or bad, inadequate, adequate, whatever, the level it may be different, but most companies do have some kind of a personal safety management system. Around 50% have a process safety management system. I'm not talking about the health of the system, but some kind of a system does exist. But what do you think about the health of the system? How good or bad it is? If you were to rate it on a scale of 10 to 1, 10 being a world-class safety system and 1 being just a basic level process safety management system, where would you rank your systems? If I say, let's say between 8 and 10, how many of you would rate your systems between 8 and 10? Okay. 8. How many of you would rate it between, let's say, 4 and 7? Great number. And below 4? No one? Okay. Now, interestingly, I've done this kind of an exercise with actual companies when I do this gap analysis with them. And when I do this with them, and it's more formal, of course, not just like this type of random survey. It's more formal. We talk about element by element, and we ask every staff member, the management and the workers, how do they rank their process safety management system against each of those elements? And incidentally, I get a very high ranking. I mean, they rank themselves very high in the initial assessment. And when you go into the details, you talk about the details and what are the exact requirements of each element, and they get a better understanding of those elements. And then we do the same survey after, let's say, 3 months or so. The rating goes down. Why would that be? I mean, you were here, after working on this system for 3 more months, you come down. Any reason for that? Sorry? So when you go deeper into the system and you try to understand the requirements of the system in greater depth, then you probably realize that yes, we have this kind of a system, that's why we gave a good rating to it, but when we see the detailed requirements, there's a lot of work still to be done there. And so while we are not at that level, we are at this level, and then we have to probably move to that level. Okay? Okay, so based on those incidents that I talked about, the Bhopal incident and the other incidents that I talked about, in 1991, OSHA promulgated this standard, popularly known as the PSM, Process Safety Management Standard, 1910.119. Now, this was introduced in 1991. Okay, what do you think? Is it still working? Has it really been able to reduce those kind of disasters that we talked about earlier, the Bhopal type, the Piper Alpha type, the Flexborough type incidents? Has it been successful in averting those kind of disasters? In other words, is it successful? Mm-hmm. It has probably reduced But when we talk about reducing, probably we don't realize, because we count the number of accidents, we don't compare the accidents that we prevented. We normally can focus on the accidents that have occurred. And there have been a lot of accidents that have still occurred even after this 1991 standard. This is a small list of some of the accidents that have occurred after. Not necessarily all in USA, different countries. Because when you talk about OSHA PSM standard, although it's a regulatory requirement in US, in other countries it's not a regulatory requirement as such, but other countries are, by and large, following this as a kind of a voluntary. They consider it's a good thing and they want to follow it, and they go, not as a legal requirement, but as a good practice. So even after this incident, this 1910.119 standard, we have had incidents in 1998, 2001, 2005, and as recently as 2018, sorry. Okay? 19. Yeah. Yes, please. How?
In that list of facilities, not all of them are living by PSM. Which ones are living by PSM and which are not?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So what he's saying basically is the failures that were identified that caused these disasters, the failures were PSM related. Okay? Now, the companies may or may not be following formally this PSM standard, but the failures that have occurred, the causes that were identified, they're related to asset integrity or poor design or management of change failures or some kind of PHA failure or HAZOP failure. So those failures were by and large related to one or more elements of the process safety management system. Okay? But many of these were actually following. I do agree with you, many were not, but most of them were. ESSO had its own PSM standard, Operational Excellence Management System. Okay? DuPont has its own. By the way, DuPont has its own a separate brand of PSM, which they not only follow in their own organizations, but they market it as a separate DuPont services, sustainable business services or whatever. Okay? And they have their own system, and then they had these disasters. In fact, I just mentioned one incident here. They had, I think, 3 incidents in quick succession, and they were put on OSHA watch list because of PSM failures. And the story goes on. I mean, it's still not over. Okay, now these are the different elements of the PSM standard as far as the OSHA 1910.119 is concerned. This is 14 elements, and these are the 14 elements that are legally mandatory within US at least. Okay, to any company that falls under this standard, which is in the standard is called covered process. So if it's covered process, which means it has those identified chemicals. It deals with those identified chemicals in the storage and transportation and use of those chemicals. And there are threshold quantities also mentioned in that appendices of the standard. So if they have those chemicals in those threshold quantities, then they are covered by the standard. And if they are covered, then they are legally required to follow these or comply with these requirements. Other than this 1910.119, which is a regulatory requirement, there are other models available for PSM. This is the DuPont model. This model has 22 elements. These are the elements which are more related to organizational factors, cultural factors, management factors. And then these are the elements which are more related to technical or risk-based facilities and equipment and personnel. Okay. So this is the DuPont model, which has these 22 elements. And then this CCPS model or AICHE model. Personally, this is my favorite model personally. This has 20 elements. Again, this is broken down into these 4 foundation pillars, and then there are different elements. There's 20 elements over there. Okay. So these different standards came about other than and there are other models also which should deal with this process safety management. I'm not covering all those models here. My primary focus is on basically the challenges that are there, because these elements, if you compare the elements of these different models, by and large, they're very similar or they overlap. For example, the DuPont system has 20 elements against the 14 elements of OSHA 1910.119. But in OSHA, you see there's one element which deals with management of change. Whereas in DuPont, they have 3 different elements which deal with management of change. It's not that it's more detailed, more comprehensive. All that the DuPont system says about in relation to those 3 separate MOC, management of change elements, they are already covered in the OSHA, but they are implicit there, and they made it more explicit in the DuPont system. Okay, and then this is the CCPS system. Okay. Now, having discussed those different systems, what, in my opinion, and the opinion is based on, as I said, working with different companies, the 5 major challenges that I consider different companies have in relation to implementing a good safety management system. Okay, these are the 5 challenges that I have come across when dealing with different companies. And based on your experiences, I would appreciate if you can either add or agree or disagree or ask any explanation or clarification on these. But this is what I have concluded based on my experiences. These 5 elements are, these 5 areas are inadequate leadership, understanding, and commitment. The senior-most leaders, they have, and this has come out in various investigations, in the Texas refinery incident, the Baker report, the Mockford report, all have very clearly described the major cause as lack of understanding, lack of understanding about the requirements, lack of understanding about the implications of ignoring process safety management standards. Okay. Other areas are fragmented versus a holistic approach. What I mean by this is basically companies which are implementing those PSM systems, many of them have this approach that they deal with element to element separately, as if they are independent elements that have to be worked upon, whereas this is a complete management system and one element builds on the other. They have a synergy between them. They are interrelated, they're interdependent. And working on one area reinforces your performance in the other area. Ignoring one area, on the other hand, or focusing on one and ignoring the other, then you lose that effect of synergy on that. Okay? You may have a good system, but then you could have it better if it had been if you follow a holistic approach, if you keep in mind these interdependencies and interconnections. Another area, and probably this would be more in the US than in other countries because it's compliance related. So if you are following just the 1910.119 and your aim is just to avoid any citation or penalties from OSHA, then your focus is only on ensuring that you're just complying and nothing else. Okay? So that's a bare minimum level that you'll be working upon then. Okay? So there's a great deal of emphasis on compliance rather than going beyond compliance. Okay? And as I said, in the US it could be because you would like to avoid the OSHA citations maybe. But even outside US, companies, even if they're not bound by OSHA requirements as such, they have the auditors are coming in and verifying their systems, and they just want to ensure that at least we don't have any major discrepancy or non-conformances from the auditors. So either it's OSHA or it's auditors, whatever, but then when you're focusing on compliance only, then your approach is limited. Okay? You're not fully utilizing all the benefits, the business benefits, the organizational benefits that you can derive from a good implementation of the process safety management system. Yeah?
Risk-based system would include what?
This would basically include, you consider your own organizational context, okay? You consider specifically your own risks, and there could be risks which require more additional controls than what the OSHA requires. Because these kind of standards, they lay out, they're not made for a particular company, right? So your particular company may have higher risks. You may be complying with the minimum requirements of OSHA, but then the risk would probably be requiring additional controls. But then you stop over there where you think you have complied, full stop. Okay. Yeah, please. Yeah. I can pass it on if you okay. You have done that, okay. I don't know really. I haven't done that kind of EPA compliance assessment, but I believe the challenges that I've mentioned here are more general in nature. So I believe they would be applicable there too, but don't consider this as a definitive answer because I've not actually done work on the EPA standard as such. Because the major difference between this EPA and OSHA requirements is EPA talks about what goes beyond the fence, outside the fence, and this is for the inside the fence. But these management systems, the elements are quite similar. Okay, so for example, if the management has a poor understanding of the implications, whether it's inside the boundary or outside the fence, probably this would still be relevant there also. Can you? There's a mic over there also. Yeah.
I think there's one that you may have missing, that would be employee involvement.
Employee involvement, yeah. Okay. Now the reason, I'll talk about employee involvement as a human factors issue or whatever in the subsequent areas when I talk about the weaker elements. Okay. But lack of management commitment or lack of a poor understanding by the management probably leads to several other issues, employee involvement being one of them. Because if the management is more focused on personal safety and less on the process safety issues, then probably the employee engagement element, the employee competence element, the employee accountability and responsibility element, they do suffer. Okay. And then there's this lack of depth and thoroughness. I mentioned in the earlier comment that when I do this kind of formal survey with the companies, their initial ranking about their own companies is very high and it goes down later on, right? That's because of the superficial approach rather than the in-depth, thorough approach. And then there's the human factor and risk perception issues. These are basically, I think the employee involvement would also come into this, because when I talk about this element, it relates more to a sense of accountability and responsibility, openness of communication, understanding about the procedures themselves being adequate and properly enforced and regulated. All that probably has to do with a lot to do with the employee involvement, I think. Okay. Now, coming to these five one by one. Okay, the major when we talk about the leadership, understanding, commitment, there's inadequate appreciation and understanding of the significance, why we need to have this standard, the process safety management system. So they have a lack of understanding on the significance of this, and because of that, since they don't realize the significance, they also fail to understand the requirements of those each different element. Okay, and that also obviously leads to a lower level of commitment by the senior management. By the way, this entire presentation has been uploaded on the to 2019 app. I personally verified this is before the session. Okay, so it's available there also. And since they don't understand and appreciate the requirement significance, hence the metrics that they use to measure the performance of the organization with respect to process safety, they're also weak, either absent completely or inadequate, or they are not the right metrics based on their own organizational context. Okay. So the performance measurements, the performance metrics, they're also either absent or ineffective or inadequate. And there's a predominant focus. When say they don't understand the significance of the PSM, there's a greater amount of focus on personal safety. Even all the metrics, the performance measurements, even they are based on personal safety requirements, and having no LTI, for example, or having worked for so many million man hours or without any major incident, those kind of metrics, they are probably more significant. And not only that they don't relate to process safety issues, but they kind of create complacence. Because having those good numbers in the personal safety areas puts you into a false sense of security with respect to your safety performance. You start believing that you're performing excellent. Your performance is excellent. The statistics tell you so. Okay? But all those statistics are related to personal safety rather than process safety. And then those are not aligned with your overall business aims, because since you don't focus on the longer term issues, like you talked about asset integrity management that you're using in your organization, right? Now, asset integrity management requires that you think longer term, the overall sustainable reliability, functionality of the equipment, rather than just the keeping it running until it dies, until it fails, okay? So that kind of approach is missing in this area. And one more deficiency that I've seen is when companies, they don't understand the interdependence and the significance of these standards, many of the companies, when they start implementing these standards, what they do is, instead of creating a kind of a process safety culture, we talked a lot about personal safety cultures, but instead of creating a process safety culture in the organization, these elements are considered as, okay, you work on this element, you do a good job, finished. Work on the second element, do a good job, finished. So it's not the holistic cultural approach that you apply on this. Yeah? Mm-hmm. You can take this mic. You have one? Okay.
The other thing is, element by element is one thing, but once they've got them all done, they consider it done. We've arrived. There's nothing else to do. But it's a process. It's got to keep going.
That's right.
On and on and on.
That's what I mean by saying this they consider it as a project. Okay? This project is over, let's work on another new project now. Okay? So that's the kind of approach. It's considered as a project, and for that you have a project team. Project team works on that project, the project is finished, the project is disbanded, and now you work on something else. So that kind of approach is, again, a poor approach. It doesn't give you that kind of a sustainable PSM culture. Okay, the second element, the fragmented versus the holistic approach. Okay. Now in this, basically, again, since the management does not have a clear understanding of how each element works to support the other elements. For example, if you want to work on process hazard analysis, you must have a good process safety information system. If you need to work on management of change, you need to have a good PSI and PHA and PSSR, okay, asset integrity management to work on. You need to work on design integrity and fabrication and spare parts and the quality of the raw materials, the quality of the spares, the quality of the equipment that is coming in. Okay? So procurement, asset integrity, management of change, they're all interrelated. So you cannot just work on these as different silos. So by not working, you lose this opportunity of having a synergy between these elements. Okay, this I talked about earlier, compliance-oriented rather than risk-based. Again, the focus is mainly to avoid citations or avoid major non-compliance from the auditors. Okay. Lack of depth and thoroughness. Again, the approach adopted is and this was the exact words used in the Texas refinery incident. If you have read this, the Baker report, they had a checklist approach. This done? Yes, done. Finished? Yes, finished. So just putting in check marks, and you think it's finished, done. Okay. So that's kind of a superficial or skin deep approach that they were following. Okay. Now, when I say this overemphasizing of misplaced efficiency, which means get it over with, we have to complete this element by, let's say, October 2019. Okay. So you just get over the things in a tick box manner. You just get it done, but the quality of that closure, action closures, is missing. The actions are closed, but the quality of the action closures is missing. Okay. Human factors and risk perceptions. Again, in this area, there's a lack of good quality safety safe operating procedures. Let's say work procedures. Okay. Sometimes, in my experience, I've seen procedures. There's a contradiction between procedures. Okay, inter-procedural contradictions. I have seen intra-procedure within a procedure. One section says this, other section says completely contradictory thing to do. Okay, it's easy to make procedures. You just have to copy and paste. Just change the logo, change the company name, and you have your own customized procedure. Okay, but when you follow that kind of a procedure, that kind of a process for defining your procedures, obviously there are gaps left out. Okay, so sometimes you don't have good procedures, or they have contradictions within them or between them, and sometimes the communication of those procedures is not good enough. How you communicate those procedures to your workforce, those who need to apply those or use those procedures, that communication is sometimes lacking or inadequate. Okay? And then even if that's there, then the implementation and enforcement areas are weak. Okay? Training and competency not aligned with the roles and responsibilities. Okay? You have your roles defined. For each role, you have the responsibilities assigned. And those responsibilities, in order to fulfill those responsibilities, there are certain requirements with respect to the competencies of those workforce. And those competencies have to be ensured through training or coaching or mentoring or experience-based, whatever, and that area is missing. Okay? Poor risk perception or low sense of vulnerability. The question that I put to you earlier, what would those companies think about their own safety performance just the day before this disaster? Okay? And that shows that they consider themselves probably like Titanic. Titanic cannot sink. Okay? And then the culture within the organization, poor communication between groups, vertical communication as well as horizontal communication between the same levels, between different levels. That kind of communication is sometimes not appropriate. Even in an organization like NASA, one of the observations in the shuttle failure was there were deficiencies identified in the design, in the materials that were used, but the engineers failed to point it out because they thought, if I point it out, I'll be considered as a troublemaker rather than providing help in this area. Okay, so they want to avoid being a troublemaker. So and now the feeling that I would be considered as a troublemaker is genuine, no? But how does that feeling come from? Where does that feeling come from? That comes from the top. Okay, so you have to remove that fear that if you point out something, if you give bad news, it won't be considered as something that you are a troublemaker or you are a showstopper. Okay. Okay. By the way, before I go into the second area, these 5 elements that I talked about, the 5 areas that I talked about, any comments on these 5 areas? Do you think they're missing out something, or you think there's something here that should not be here? Any comments on that? Yeah?
I think also a challenge, I think, for our organization is around process safety information, making sure that it's accurate, that it's
Okay.
maintained, because that's the key, whether it's change management or just the right documentation, drawings, all of that
Okay,
stuff.
good.
Especially if you're trying to build a program that, maybe you didn't have all that information.
So you're doing it from the scratch?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. Having poor, inadequate, I would say, or outdated, or sometimes even inaccurate process safety information is a big problem, but that I've covered in the elements, the weak elements. Okay. Any other observation? Okay, then I'll move on to the 5 elements, the specific elements of the PSM standard that I think are weak elements, in the sense that the application of these, or the implementation of these elements is lacking in some area. And these are the 5 elements that I consider weak in implementation by the different companies. Your PSI would come somewhere here, right, in the PHA, because that's a prerequisite for a good PHA, and also for a good MOC, and also for good PSSR, okay? So that has an implication in many standards. So this PSI would probably come here as well as here, and maybe even here, okay? So these are the 5 weak elements that I consider: process hazard analysis, okay? Asset integrity and reliability, okay? Management of change, contractor safety management, and your accident investigations and analyses, and learning from those incident investigations. Now, in the asset integrity, why I consider asset integrity as a weak area is because most companies, when they have this asset integrity management systems, it's called mechanical integrity in the OSHA standard, but DuPont calls it asset integrity, and I personally prefer asset integrity as covers a more broader area. So this asset integrity issues, most of the companies, when they have this program on asset integrity management systems, they focus by and large on the operation and maintenance phase of the life cycle of an asset. This is one phase, probably the lengthiest phase of an asset, but not necessarily the most important phase. Okay? But most of the emphasis is to have good maintenance, to ensure good operations, to ensure that the preventive checks are done, preventive maintenance work is done, and that would probably give you a good asset life. Okay? But when you talk about asset integrity management system, the scope is much bigger than that. In fact, it starts from the early conceptual design, the selection of technology, the conceptual design, the detailed engineering design. And once you're done with that, then the actual procurement, the purchasing, the fabrications, the construction, installations, assembling, all those areas. Okay? And then once all that is finished, then you come into the commissioning phase. And it's the operation and maintenance phase only starts after these first 3 phases are completed. So if you have a poor design, what you have done is you have built in unsafe operations. You have built in additional maintenance requirements into that. If your selection of material for a piping or a vessel or whatever is inappropriate for that particular service that will be put into, either the pressure or the chemistry, whatever. So the metallurgy doesn't match with that chemistry. What we have done is, however well you operate it, and however detailed maintenance programs you may have, you have built into the system an unsafe design. Okay? So good asset integrity management starts way up before this actual operation maintenance. Okay? There are failures in these areas, in all these 3 areas. And then the operators and the maintainers, they have to live with that for the rest of their lives. Either you go through expensive modifications, or you go through excessive maintenance activities. Yeah.
The lack of operational life.
Mm-hmm.
You have older plants, they go 50, 60, 70 years of stuff, and modification and maintenance. O&M trying to make it, everything's to be replaced or decommissioned. They let it go on,
But I've worked with and I've worked in very old plants. I've worked in an Exxon fertilizer plant, which was a kind of a vintage plant, and they were operating at 148% efficiency. Okay, so if you apply good engineering, if you apply good maintenance philosophies and proper design modifications at the right time, properly you can have a plant run much more longer than this design life and much more efficiently. Okay, then the other area, sorry, where was I? Okay, then the other area that I considered in this asset integrated management area, okay, I said there's a greater deal of amount of focus on operation and maintenance, but even within this operation and maintenance area, the operating and management systems, the inspection and preventive maintenance and reliability-centered maintenance, those systems are inappropriate, inadequate. We don't actually go into developing different strategies of maintenance. Like you may consider for a particular piece of equipment that your breakdown maintenance will be the best option there. Why go for predictive maintenance? That may be more expensive depending on the criticality of the equipment. So if you identify your safety critical equipment and then you identify what is not safety critical or what is not production critical, then based on that you can develop different maintenance or different inspection strategies for your different classes of equipments. Okay.
I think the PHA covers everything except decommissioning. In terms of the design, trying to figure out the what ifs of what could happen before the plant is even built, I think the PHAs cover that.
But should cover that.
Yes.
I won't say would cover that, should cover that, yeah.
But I mean, that's its intent. Whether they apply it properly or not is.
But when you look at these disasters, there have been failures in this area. And with companies like Chevron, like BP, like Exxon, they have had failures.
I'm familiar with the Williams Olefin, which is right up the river. And they actually did a PHA, a follow-up PHA, and said, oh, we have a problem here we need to fix. And it got put on the back burner, didn't get fixed. And then it blew up.
So when I talk about this PHA, this is one of the problems, that sometimes you don't do a good PHA itself. Sometimes you have a good PHA, you identify problems, you develop action plans, but then you don't implement those plans. Other things then probably supersede. Then more other priorities come in, right? In the case of Texas Refinery, for example, there was a recommendation of one of the HIRA and PHAs that you need to have a stack for this excess fluid, right? They did not build that stack. But it was a recommendation in one of the earlier PHAs. So these HERA or PHAs, they are done in a superficial manner. Sometimes we have this rubber stamping approach. We have a team, and apparently the team is competent, and there's a team leader. Let's say I have a team of 6 persons. Actually, 2 persons are doing the PHA, and the other 4 are just nodding, okay? And then maybe putting the signs on that, signatures on that, okay? So that's kind of a rubber stamping approach. And this approach is not only for PHA, it's also relevant to MOC and PSSR and other analyses, okay? And then, of course, the action closure, as you mentioned, that's inadequate. Even if some of the actions are identified, they're either put in the back burner because of cost considerations or because of the equipment cannot be spared for shutdown if it is required there. And those kind of considerations, then they supersede. Okay, another weak area is the management of change. And that's why probably DuPont has 3 MOC elements rather than 1. Okay, maybe that could be a pointer. So these MOCs, management of change, you have a lot of changes going on in the organizations, not only in the main design, you have got, you change the processes, you change the equipment, you change the metallurgy, you change the materials, you change the type of valves. So there's so many changes different going on, but when applying the process of management of change to those changes, companies are by and large inconsistent. You may have a MOC process for a particular change, and for a very similar change at some other point of time, you may not do an MOC. The priorities could be different at that point in time. The priorities could be different at this point in time, right? Yeah. Safety critical equipments. Okay. So, the thing that I'm trying to point out here is you have the safety critical equipments. Failure of those equipment could be critical, right? So even if you defer the planned or scheduled inspections or preventive maintenance activities on them, you are vulnerable to certain hazards. And you need to do an MOC for that. Most companies don't do that. Okay. But this could be a serious issue. Okay. You've identified it as a safety critical equipment because it can cause a major disaster. And if you don't do the required inspection or maintenance activity on that, then you are vulnerable. So you have to do an MOC and find out what other actions you can take in the interim period to get over that vulnerability. Okay. And then the assessments themselves are superficial sometimes, not done in real depth. Sometimes all these stakeholders are not involved. Sometimes it's again a rubber stamp type of activity. Okay. Contractor safety management system, just like the asset integrity management system. Just like when you talk about asset integrity, your focus should not only be on the operation and maintenance, it should be upstream of that and downstream of that also, from the design to the decommissioning. Similarly, when you talk about contractors, most of the emphasis is on this execution phase. When the contractor comes into your location and they actually start doing the work, how you manage them, how you supervise them, how you ensure that they are following all the rules. The actual management system for contractors starts much before that. It starts when you're actually selecting your contractors. And even before that, when you're defining your contract requirements. Okay? So at the planning stage, this, by the way, this process that I've shown here, this is the model from IOGP, okay? Oil and Gas Producers Association. Okay? They have this 8-step model. I've shown it as a 7-step because I've combined these pre-mob and mob, but otherwise it's an 8-step process. So you need to focus on each step. And the earlier you focus, if you screen out poor contractors at the early stage, then probably at this stage, when you're doing the execution, you will have less headaches, you will have less problems, you will require lesser supervision, monitoring. Okay. Okay, as far as the incident analysis is concerned, again, many times these analyses or investigations are done in a superficial manner. We don't really go down deep enough to identify the real issues, and only the surface issues, the apparent issues, the obvious issues, they are identified, and we start working on them, and the incidents then keep on repeating themselves. So probably this is another very weak area where we consider as investigation as a form to be filled out. We have an investigation report form, and we have an investigation report form, and we fill out those. We tick mark all the boxes, and we fill out all the blanks, and we consider that we have done a good job on the organization on the investigation, and now the file can be closed. And when we say the file can be closed, which means we don't even have to learn. We don't even have to apply those learnings. We don't even have to take action on the recommendations of that investigation. Okay? And then when we talk about this incident analysis, another weak area in this is we just don't have to learn from our own incidents. We can even learn from others' incidents. We don't do the real analysis of that, but the lessons drawn from those other lessons, from other companies, other incidents with other organizations, even they could be a learning area for us. Okay? So we need to learn from others as well, it's not from just all from our own incidents. Okay, by the way, any comments on these 5 areas? related to the 5 weak areas. You talked about PSIs is covered. The process safety information cycle, okay. Okay, the 5 areas which provide us good opportunity for having safety management, process safety management systems. Now these are working beyond compliance. I've already talked about the issues related to compliance. If you just focus on compliance and nothing else, obviously you are not getting the full benefits, or you're not really fully utilizing all the benefits you can get from a good PSM system. If you just focus on compliance, so we have to work beyond compliance, which means we have to go based on our own risk analysis. We have to identify actions that we think are necessary rather than what just the standard says. Also, we need to focus on organizations which are not covered by the process. Okay. OSHA regulation is very restrictive in the sense that it identifies certain chemicals. There's a whole list of chemicals, and there's a whole list of threshold quantities for those chemicals. So if you just focus on those and you consider, if I'm covered, I have to follow. If I'm not covered, I don't have to follow. The benefits of PSM could be accrued by other organizations which are not even covered. I've applied this in construction. I've applied this in food manufacturing. I've applied this in transport management systems. So it really works. The elements, they are useful. Okay. Another area where you can get the benefits of a good implementation is harnessing the general good engineering practices, the RAGA gap. Okay. Recognized and generally accepted good engineering practices. Okay. So it's not just the standard. There's so many different good engineering design philosophies available which you can apply and benefit from that, particularly in the areas of asset integrity management, particularly in the areas of incident investigations. Okay. And then leveraging technology. By technology, I mean you have this cloud, you have this IT systems, you have all these real-time data management, large data management systems. Yeah?
Smartphone.
Sorry?
Smartphone.
Exactly. So communication and information technology and IT, all this provides a lot of room for applying those technology and benefiting from that. And the last one is building on personal safety success. Okay? As we saw earlier, most of the companies, they already have a good personal safety management system. You can use that to leverage your process safety management system. They don't have to be two separate areas. Okay, we have done personal safety, now let's focus on. You can build on that same foundation. There's so many different elements which are common to these. Incident investigation, you apply it on personal safety as well as process safety, right? Contractor management, you apply both ways. So there are several areas. Permit to work system, for example. Okay, you apply it here as well in the process safety management systems. So you build upon those elements which already have worked in successfully in the personal safety management systems. Okay. I'll just quickly go through the last part, the 5 keys to success. Okay. Now here, these are basically the offshoot from the earlier 3 areas that I pointed out. Okay. When you talk about lack of awareness or commitment from the top management, and this was one of the recommendations of the Texas refinery incident in the Baker report, there should be, and they had given this recommendation, there should be a non-executive vice president or director level person who should be dedicatedly assigned this responsibility of managing process safety. Okay? So you have to, even if you don't have a vice president or director level, at least at some really senior level, there should be some dedicated person given this specific responsibility and accountability for process safety management systems. Okay. Monitoring leading indicators. Now, particularly in the case of process safety, the lagging indicators really don't give a good indication because the major disasters don't occur daily. Okay? They would occur maybe once in 10 years or once in 20 years or maybe, I don't know. So you can't just rely on these lagging indicators. So you have to focus on the leading indicators. Okay. Then you create a sense of vulnerability and low threshold of intervention. So the slightest leakage from a pump seal should prompt you into a big action rather than, oh, it's a small leakage, no problem. Okay? So your threshold for intervention should be really be very low, and you should take actions even when you have these small process events. Another area is the normalizing safe behaviors. Again, this relates to creating a good culture where you don't the normalization of risks or unsafe behaviors is minimized and safe behaviors are encouraged. Collaborative learning, I believe, in my opinion, in my experience, there are competencies available, pockets of competencies available in organizations. It's not that the company doesn't have all these competencies. There are competencies, but they are in different pockets. Okay? We need to learn from each other. Operations, maintenance, the designers, the technical departments, the process departments, they have to come together, share their learnings, learn from each other, and develop coherent system. When they're working in silos, then probably a lot of learning is, this just goes down through the cracks, and you don't actually build up on the different learnings that is already there in the organization. Sometimes I'm a consultant, sometimes I go as the consultant, and I found out that solutions are already there, but there's no communication between the groups. And when I give them a solution, it's not that I have come up with some kind of a rocket science solution, it was already there. But the people, they did not have this kind of a collaborative learning approach. Okay, so these are the 5 areas where we can build upon from each other. Okay. So these are the 4 areas that I talked about, the 5 major challenges, the 5 weakest elements, the 5 opportunities, and the 5 keys to success. Any questions, any comments, any thing that you want to add to this? Okay, if you want to have any questions that come up later on, okay, I'll give you my email address, okay, and I have this, my cards here. You can pick up the card. You can, even later on, if you have a question on this, and once you go through the presentation in the app, if some question arises, you can always contact me later on also, okay. I'm on LinkedIn, on Facebook. This is my email address, and you can take a card from there, okay. Thank you very much for being